So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there. So Peadar Keating is back in Ireland from his, I won't call it a holiday, but his sojourn to the UK, where he was convicted in relation to Thomas Bomber Kavanagh's gun plot.
Yeah.
And he was allowed to serve the sentence in Ireland. Now, he was expected back at some stage before Christmas, but anyway, he's back in Portlaoise. And the reason we know that is because he's already proving who's boss. And there has been sort of a situation where on C Block, where he's kept, the prison were going to place a sort of a young, very dangerous, volatile crew that have come into the prison system. And Keating sent word that they were not welcome.
Yeah. So it just shows you Keating is still calling the shots, which is interesting.
He's like an elder lemon there now, isn't he?
I don't know, an elder lemon.
43. What am I?
Well, yeah, younger lemons. Younger. So it's interesting because, of course, Peadar Keating in court publicly and after the court case in the UK publicly disassociated himself from Bomber Kavanagh. So his authority doesn't come from Bomber Kavanagh because he's still gone back into Portlaoise Prison and has gone back in as the top dog. So, I mean, that is interesting.
It is.
It just shows you, I suppose,
But Bomber Kavanagh, I think, has just been sidestepped completely when it comes to the Kinahan organisation now.
Yeah, and which is interesting, you see, because, where does that authority come from? There's obviously, it's not a formal position. You don't get to, put a CV in and get declared top dog in prison. But it is something that's taken seriously because the prison authorities, when people come are due to be set on wings, questions are asked, is there an issue here? Because obviously people can't just be placed in cells and then for violence to occur. I think prisoners get an interview process where they go in and they be asked, do you have any issues from the outside with these people? But also the prisoners on the wing ultimately get asked, is there going to be an issue? And on this occasion, Peadar Keating has said, yeah, there is an issue.
Yeah.
But he's speaking for the wing in total. And obviously if people have an issue with Peadar Keating, there is
But that's a personality thing, I think, and it's an experience thing, and it's a respect thing as well as, like you say, you don't put in your CV and get the job,
Yeah.
But it's almost an unspoken thing, isn't it? And obviously Keating commands and demands and gets the respect of others in there.
Yeah. And also tells them what way to go. I mean, people can be told in prison, you have a problem with this guy, but you're just going to suck it up and not do anything because...
And I think he's seen as within the criminal underworld, okay? We're not talking about our world. We're talking about that world. He's seen as an honest broker.
Yeah.
He's somebody that seems to be pretty well liked, respected. And when he gives advice, they listen. And it's probably usually pretty good advice if you're in a position, that you're facing, you're in prison, obviously, so you have been and you've been involved in organised crime. But he has done that. This young crew are going to be moved into a different wing. Very dangerous, volatile crew, young, very young, and they have been causing chaos. What alignments have they? Because it would appear that, and the Dundons, the McCarthy Dundon mob, and obviously Wayne and John Dundon, who are in prison, have proved again and again that they will side up with the highest bidder. And it appears that this crew, this younger crew that Keating has rejected, have sort of befriended or have had in some way managed to make an alliance with Wayne Dundon.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be an alliance that I would be happy to make myself. I think the Dundons have, they're notorious for... speaking out of both sides of their mouth, let's put it that way. But it shows you this young crew, of course, they had an association with the family in West Dublin. There have been believed to have been tensions there and a fallout. So although these people can be the most feared in the city or in that part of the city that they come from. When you go into the prison in Portlaoise, which really has it's Ireland's only high security prison, is how it's described. I mean, the security levels there are far, far higher. So a lot of the major gangland figures end up in there. But you can be a big shot on the outside. You can have kids running around after you. You can be, causing fear and intimidation there. But it's a very different matter getting into the jail system there. The Dundons have not been liked in prisons. They weren't liked outside. They obviously were people who had that fear factor in their own area. But they've continued to cause problems in prison. They've continued to be volatile and dangerous. But they've in recent times they've been not the power brokers in the system at all.
But they're very opportunistic, and it appears that this younger crew that Keating has rejected, that they have beef with another prisoner in there who's been held on remand and is facing charges, that they had put a bounty on that individual's head within the prison. And it seems from intelligence that there were fears that Wayne Dundon was going to try and take up that bounty, I mean, to consider killing somebody in prison.
Yeah.
It's such a confined environment, and I often find it interesting the way intelligence is quite, I won't say easily garnered, because intelligence gathering is never an easy thing. No. But there isn't a place where you can go offside and have whispered conversations with people. A lot of stuff has to be done on the phones. And
totally. But
of course, a very controversial issue that prisoners are always found with phones and all the rest of it. But it's also a very good way of picking up intelligence and working out what's going on.
But there's a constant paranoia in prison about people going on medical appointments, Like that has always been a big one.
Yeah.
Like your man, John Smith, got taken out for a medical appointment. He's actually gone to see the governor, or he's gone to see the guards to rat up.
Yeah.
Like that is a big paranoia.
Yeah.
And like there's been people asking for medical fucking receipts and everything.
Yeah.
Because people get really paranoid that's
what they're at. Well, I mean, that's proved in a way sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
When we sat through the trial and we heard Jonathan Dowdall's evidence, like there was a little very basic trick for him to get talking to the police, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And of course, it's difficult for everybody because your every move is watched. But for Dundon to consider taking that bounty while in prison, I mean, we have seen other cases where somebody has been killed in prison. There's very few corners of a prison that aren't under observation at all times, be it by CCTV or by the human eye. It's not easy to escape a crime scene if one should occur. You're only going to be a very short distance away from it. Like, it is the most high risk place to commit a crime. And at the same time, people are often beaten and attacked.
Yeah, well, maybe, I mean, it certainly has happened on a number of occasions recently, and we've spoken about some of them. There used to be with the mafia in America, well, if you're serving life and you're not getting out, what difference does it make if you killed somebody in prison? And some of that logic was involved in that Whitey Bulger case. Whitey Bulger obviously was, well, an Irish-American, if we want to claim a bit of him, but one of the most notorious mobsters in US history. He went on the run for many years, was caught, ended up in prison. I think he was in his early 90s, was he?
He was in his late 80s anyway, in a wheelchair.
And he was stabbed to death by a mafia hitman. And the talk was, well, what can they do to me?
Well, the difference in the States is that you go to jail and they do throw away the key. Whereas here, you will eventually get to a point where you'll be considered for parole, and maybe, I mean, the likes of the Dundons, both serving life, John and Wayne Dundon, along with Desi Dundon, their other brother, serving life. I mean, they are so dangerous, it'd be hard to understand that they would be given sanction for release by the Minister for Justice, because I think they remain dangerous. But, if you do another murder while in prison, you might as well hang up your boots there. True.
But I mean, Desi Dundon is there, it must be well over 20 years.
Yeah.
And, in the normal course of events, he'd be edging towards getting out. If you look at Brian Meehan, who part of the John Gilligan gang, serving a life sentence for the murder of Veronica Guerin, in the normal course of events, a life sentence prisoner would probably be out. But that notoriety certainly keeps them there, doesn't it? I mean,
it's amazing, like when we're talking about the Dundons still and their involvement in various things. And of course, they popped up in the murder of Robbie Lawler because Ger Dundon, their other brother, who's not serving life but is serving 15 years for a kidnap now in the UK, he was with Lawler when he was murdered. He was arrested, Dundon, along with Levi Killeen and Quincy Bramble, and they were released without charge by the PSNI. Within days of that, 2 female associates of the Dundons were caught by the National Surveillance Unit as they picked up 50,000, which the Dundons, Wayne Dundon certainly is said to have opportunistically claimed.
Like a bounty.
That his brother was with, he claimed the murder. And they're still mixed up in that. I mean, they're mixed up at that point in the murder of Robbie Lawler, who, has everybody against him, but, the PSNI have told the courts in the north that there was 20 people involved in that it was a culmination of criminals from the north, from the Republic. There's names floating around, and that big names like Mr. Big himself, with, a belief that he had something to do with that, and others. And yet the Dundons, who are both in jail, and we think that, that's the end of them, they're involved too. They still have a reach from prison.
They do have a reach. They presumably have contacts from prison, but they're not. They're neither liked nor they particularly smart about it. I mean, there's other people in those prisons who've gone into prison, who've built up these contacts, who've come out of jail, and you hear very little about them. And I was talking to somebody recently about a well-known criminal, and he was describing how he used being in prison to make all of these contacts and has gone on to become a far, far more accomplished drug dealer and drug trafficker than he ever was. The Dundons are of the other type. They're blustering in, violent, opportunistic, but certainly not cunning or clever.
Well, I think
cunning.
I think Wayne Dundon is pretty cunning and dangerous, really dangerous. I mean, if you consider that he is befriending this individual because there's a bounty on their head, he's obviously befriending this individual in the prison in order to put that big bare arm around him. I'll protect you. You stay with me. While all the while, he's yet again attempting, or it's considered that he is attempting to carry out a double cross.
Yeah.
And it's all about double crossing, He double crosses the Maguire faction in Drogheda when they arranged to collect the 50,000 off them, claiming the murder of Robbie Lawler. He double crossed Kieran Keane, obviously, for which his brother Desi is serving a life term in prison. So he does have this tendency, Wayne Dundon, to bring people close and then to sort of double cross them. And we know that he is very much associating with his cousin, Larry McCarthy, in prison. They appear to have fallen out, but they're now back. Talking. I would just never trust that.
No.
Would you?
No, I wouldn't trust
him. Having tea with him.
No, I wouldn't have tea with him.
No.
I wouldn't. Look, they are very, very dangerous. And when there was a time, he absolutely ruled the roost in Clover Hill and Wheatfield. When they were in Wheatfield at one stage, Wayne Dundon was the guy who called all the shots.
But do you remember that picture? I'm just trying to remember when that was. I've hit you with this now and we haven't looked it up. There was an inmate who John and Wayne had sort of tortured and branded, and they write something on his head.
Yeah, it was Desi and John, actually.
Desi and John.
Yeah, so it was, they'd written, I can't remember what they written. That was in Wheatfield when they were kind of at the height of their power. The Dundons, of course, were very close to members of the Crumlin and Drimnagh gangs. Obviously, Paddy Doyle had gone and lived down there at times. They had very close associations with Graham the Weak Whelan in particular.
Paddy Doyle had or Barry?
No, Paddy Doyle had been down. Well, he'd been down there.
Yeah.
He used to go down there and meet with them. Barry Doyle ultimately went and lived down there, but Paddy Doyle and Graham the Weak Whelan were their big contacts, and that gave them an authority in the prisons. And outside. And they had a peak of power at one stage in Wheatfield where they absolutely controlled everything in this kind of really, really fearful way. There was people would be slashed if for owing a few quid, people were being forced to smuggle drugs in, families were being paid. What they used to do would threaten people. They'd bring up their family and money had to be deposited in these bookies accounts, which could be done on the phone. So really, really terrible reign of terror, but the prison service have handled them with much more care in recent times. They've moved them around the prisons a lot quicker, kept them separate at times. They haven't allowed them to take that position because of I think there was a sense that they had just too much control. But since they've been serving those life sentence prisoners, you'll see the stories we've written about them. They're scattering around the country all the time, kept separately, kept together at times. I think the prison service have managed them an awful lot better.
It sounds like they have their job to do in Portlaoise at the moment with all that's going on and the various characters that are in there. I mean, the young crew that Dundon has sort of, what would we say, befriended or associated himself with, are a mirror image of what the Dundon brothers were like when they were out free and terrorising Limerick.
Yeah,
there's a similar level of violence there. There's a similar sort of a backup they have for that crew. They have for one another's backs. They're probably the most volatile and dangerous force that the state is reckoning with at the moment.
Yeah. And again, like the Dundons, they're very much of the gang grooming types. They have a lot of young teenagers being sort of dragged into their remit, terrorising them and then forcing other teens to terrorise other teens.
Yeah.
A lot of intimidation, a sort of lack of sophistication. When you get down to seeing the evidence where, they really rely on that fear and violence to keep people in line. But if something breaks, it can really go wrong because they don't have the sophistication that you would see in other criminal outfits.
A different way of policing approach, I imagine, to them. It has to be a saturated policing approach and you have to sort of be there ready for when something goes wrong or goes off. When you have the more sophisticated groupings like the family, big network, the Waldrons, you're really going after the business.
You're going after the business and you're hoping for digital communications because a lot of these criminals have been undone by what they've put on phones. But with these other guys, they're going to leave. They're not that sophisticated. No. There's going to be potential to pick up actual evidence, DNA, and then you're really hoping that you get members of the public who've had enough, who see that they can come forward and give a few statements and that's what they really hope. These people and the public are right to come forward in those circumstances because these people, they don't have the lifespan. They will end up in prison one way or another.
While we're on that, and to finish up, next week we're going to run a few podcasts in relation to drug intimidation we've been speaking about. We have conducted a very interesting interview with Christy Mangan, the former chief superintendent, who ended his career in Drogheda during the feud, a very dramatic end to a lengthy career. But he has really good and interesting things to say to people, to talk to people who maybe are being intimidated, and good advice, I would think. And
I think so. I think it's great. I think it was really interesting to hear him sort of address that hopelessness that people feel in recent times, speaking about those young tearaway gang or whatever you want to call them. Again, I've spoken to people and they're already in that position where they feel there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, because these things are really frightening, but they do play out eventually.
They can.
They come to an end eventually, or somewhat an end from that very high octane place. And that's what he does talk about, really. And it's just trying to support the community through that.
Yep.
But anyway, we'll run some of that next week. And if anybody wants to get in contact with us,
go on.
You go.
Just holler up. No. Well, it's
like, I mean, how much stuff do you remember?
crimeworld@sundayworld.com.
Thank you. Is the email.
Yeah, crimeworld@sundayworld.com.
Now you have it. You're going to say it again.
Yeah.
And also you can contact myself and Niall. DMs are open, or, just email us or Instagram or whatever.
Slide on in there.
Just slide on in there, yeah. Okay. So, right, we'll come back to this next week. Thanks, Niall.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.